Hi there. Thank you for joining me for the latest edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cooke, and this week's show has a bit of an education flavor to it. In just a few moments, I'll speak to the new principal at the Nova Scotia Community College's Strait Area campus, and he'll talk about how COVID-19 has impacted the way he and his fellow faculty have been trying to educate students at the community college level. We'll also take a look at the life and legacy of Silver Donald Cameron, including one of his most important roles, that of educator. And we'll check in on two young Port Hawkesbury residents who are hoping to educate their Strait Area neighbors about the importance of showing respect to African Americans and African Canadians. But we begin tonight with a look at the Strait Regional Centre for Education. You know, public school has been very different around here since the pandemic and the social distancing protocols swept through Nova Scotia in March, and that's impacted everything from how your children learn their school subjects to whether there are going to be proms or graduations as usual at the end of June. So we decided to check in with Paul Landry. He's the Executive Director of the Strait Regional Centre for Education. Let's listen to that interview now. Obviously, these are very, very different times than earlier this year in terms of just getting basic public education out to the people of the Strait region, to the students and their families. Can we wind the clock back a little bit to get a sense of how prepared the Strait Regional Centre of Education and its individual schools were for the pandemic to set in?
Yes, there certainly was some preparation that was taking place prior to March the 13th, when we had to make quite a change in how we do things. So we had been meeting a number of times previous to that date in preparation for possible COVID-19 pandemic. And, there was lots of processes and procedures that we were considering along the way prior to that happening. I guess initially our planning focused on keeping schools open and what it would take to be able to do that in our region. So we had a number of meetings regarding that. And then we had to make a change very quickly as we approached March the 13th. And we had to shift direction at that time. And it was just prior to, I guess, the Friday prior to the March break happening. So we did have the luxury of a bit of time over March break to get together to plan and get ready for what learning would look like from there forward. And so we created our own pandemic planning committee that we had within the region, and we communicated often with our provincial partners with education and early childhood development, as well as with public health.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the concept of communication, because that leads me into my next question. Obviously, pandemic-based education in a public school system doesn't work without constant communication. Can you walk us a bit through that and about how often you folks would be speaking to people like principals and teachers and such, and just getting updates on how everything seemed to be going? What was that process like over the last couple of months?
That process has been quite a change, really, for us on how we communicate and how we collaborate. But I will say that there's been tremendous cooperation and collaboration amongst all of the staff to help prepare for at-home learning for all of our students. In the initial stages of the pandemic and when schools and buildings were closed down, we met on a daily basis, communicating with our provincial partners on a daily basis, as well as with our regional teams and our pandemic planning team. And then as we got on the other side of March break, then we were meeting daily as well with our school administrators, and they held many meetings as well with their teaching staff and their staffs within their buildings through various means, through conference calls and through technology meeting rooms, through different suites that they use to do that. So tremendous amount of communication, especially in the first few weeks of the pandemic as we were preparing to get ready for at-home learning. A lot of shifts in how we were going to do it, and lots of communication. But we still, as we've progressed, through the months to where we are today, we still have very regular communication. Not every day, close to it. We still meet at least a couple of times a week with everyone involved. And I know our staffs meet both as whole staffs and in learning teams that they've created to support students.
I've heard the comment more than once, Paul, that even if this pandemic had occurred as recently as 2010 or 2005, it would have been much more difficult to be able to carry out basic activities like the ones that you folks are carrying out now in terms of the learning at home modules. Do you get the sense, speaking to teachers, speaking to principals, and even in feedback from families, that the technology has advanced to the point where this type of thing is working? Are you getting good feedback from the real stakeholders here, which is the students and their families, about how this has all been working over the past couple of months?
There are certainly some benefits that we're seeing through the use of technology, and the platform that we're using, I think, is quite good. It has allowed our teachers have had to adapt, and some were using it prior to the pandemic. Some of the teachers have had to or have changed to deliver that programming, and some of the feedback has been positive. Some of the feedback is we're still learning and trying to figure this out, which is quite normal. And what we've been finding often is that between teachers and students and regional staff, everyone's been sort of working together to figure it out. So certainly lots of benefits around that. And there's different ways that they're working through this, sort of high tech and sort of mid tech and low tech options, so that everyone is included. So it's been a very interesting journey for sure, but I think a positive journey that we can do this, and everyone really came together to make it happen.
Now, we are coming up to the point where the school year, the academic year, is actually going to officially end. Students and teachers, or some combination thereof, are going to be allowed to go back into the buildings the following week to be able to reclaim some of their materials. Can you break down for me just how that's going to work? Sure.
So, as you noted, school does finish up this week. The formal at-home learning portion of the school year will conclude this Friday, and so some of our teachers have been already into the buildings collecting some of their personal belongings that they have not been able to access or weren't able to complete to gather up all of their belongings and materials. So some of them, most of them actually have been in the buildings already and prepared their classrooms for our usual summer processes that we have with regards to cleaning and maintenance and those types of things. So as we say, most of them have completed. After this week, staff or students and families or students will be able to access their personal belongings that have been in the buildings since prior to the March break. So that's another process. But we are, as we're doing that, we are following strict public health guidelines on access and public health protocols around COVID-19, providing extra cleaning, and our custodial staffs will be on site, and the number of people entering and exiting the building will certainly be controlled and safe for our school communities to be able to do this. So we think we have quite a good plan in place. Our school administrators have been really busy arranging that and working with students and families and our staff, and we certainly appreciate all the work that has gone into this. as well as our operations staff, who have worked very closely with our school administration and regional teams to make this event safe for people to enter, come in and pick up their belongings.
Right. Looking a little later in June, Paul, I want to speak a little bit about graduating students, about grade 12s. And back in March, when the real changes were announced, Premier McNeil said at the time that grade 12 students would not have to worry, that they would be able to complete their year, to be able to get the credits they needed, to basically have everything in place to be able to finish the process of graduation, but mainly to prepare them for post-secondary education. And just focusing on that for a moment, I'm wondering, do you feel that that's been the case within the Strait Regional Centre for Education? Do you feel that teachers have been given the tools they need to be able to bring the grade 12 students to the end of the line to be able to finish things up?
Right. So that was our initial focus when we were looking at getting at-home learning going. Was our number one priority after the pandemic hit, and we were making changes to how we delivered learning. Our grade 12s were our number one focus because we wanted to keep them, on the timelines that they had for to proceed with graduation. So, after March the 13th, if you were on track to graduate prior to March the 13th, you would still have that opportunity to graduate. And, if there were some things that, you may not have been on track to graduate and needed some extra supports, there has been certainly lots of focus on students to help them achieve that from March the 13th until now. But really, our teachers and our students have been able to improve their scores, their marks from March the 13th, working through e-learning opportunities, mostly through the Google Suite that we currently use to work with our students. So. For the most part, we think that most of our students have done quite well along this process and are on track to graduate later on this month.
And when graduation comes, this is a topic that's been coming up more and more over the last couple of weeks, just the concept that obviously due to social distancing restrictions, even the eased restrictions that are still in place at this time, it's going to be very difficult to be able to carry out a graduation ceremony as it normally would take place. Obviously, the principals and administrations at the individual high schools are taking a look at that. Is that something that your office within the Center of Education is involved with? Is there collaboration happening here in terms of how to stage a graduation that follows the rules and is safe for everyone?
We are going to be setting up graduation recognition events at each of our high schools, and it will involve following closely public health protocols with regards to congregation. So there will be appointments set up where graduates can come into the building with their gowns and caps on, and with some members of the family. They'll be able to come in and get their photo taken with a backdrop from their school, either with themselves or with their family members as well. Pick up their diplomas, and then pick up an envelope that they usually get when they do graduate that has all the things that they need in there to move on from graduation and to transition into any post-secondary institution that they may be heading for. So we think it's not ideal. We would like to be having our traditional ceremonies celebrating this and people getting together. But unfortunately, we are not able to do that this year. So we think that this event certainly will be able to provide some positive recognition to our graduates and benefit them as they go forward.
This brings me to the question, where do we go from here? And more importantly, where does the education system locally go from here? Obviously, you folks are waiting, as are many of us, for the various directives that'll be coming from public health and from the provincial government over the course of the summer. And of course, we keep an eye on the possibility that there could be a second wave of COVID-19 sweeping through either in the summer or through the fall, or perhaps both. With all that being taken into account, how does the Strait Regional Centre for Education prepare for the 2020-2021 academic year? What kind of role do you folks play in basically what happens from here on in?
So we've been doing some planning, both in the region here in the Strait Regional Centre for Education, of what September could look like. At this time, as we know, it's very hard to predict, and we're not speculating at this time what things are going to look like in September, but we are preparing for different scenarios that may develop over the summer or throughout this month from now until then, I guess. And so we're working within the region, but we're also working with our provincial partners as well. So the other regions across the province, we're getting together to plan and prepare, and that really helps us out a lot with regards to sharing resources, sharing ideas, and working on plans together. So we are committing a lot of time at this time to be ready for where we arrive at late summer into September, and what school will look like at that time.
Okay. A quick follow-up question on that, Paul. I'm just wondering, what does that mean for registration for programs such as pre-primary within the Strait Regional Centre for Education? What happens there, and what have you told the parents that could be affected by this?
So we have been having ongoing registration with our pre-primary program. So parents are able to register. We promoted that late, I think early in February, later in January. And typically with pre-primary programming, it's been in our region now for a couple of years. And that's an ongoing registration opportunity that parents can have. So this year we put up a link that parents can register online. So that's ongoing, and those processes, we're still accepting registrations and encouraging parents and families to register for pre-primary because, like we said, we could be in school, or we may have to make some changes. We're not sure of that right now, but we're certainly promoting registration for the program.
Last question to you, Paul, is one that I ask to a lot of my interview subjects at this point in time. Do you take any positive steps or any learning away from a period like this, where you folks have had on more than one occasion to reinvent the wheel in terms of basic public education and how your students are learning and how in some cases they're preparing to graduate? What can you take away from a time like this that could be helpful and positive for the Strait Regional Centre for Education and its schools in the future?
Really, Adam, I have just been so impressed with how everyone has come together to make this happen. For everyone from our professional collaboration with our staffs and the cooperation that we've had from students and families and our school communities and our partners that we work with, our provincial partners and so on. The support that we've had and the cooperation and collaboration really has just been outstanding, and the willingness to learn new things and to try new things and to make shifts and lots of pivots and so on along the way. So it's been just tremendous, I guess the sense of teamwork and support that we've received certainly through this process.
Thank you very much. We've been speaking to Paul Landry. He is the Regional Executive Director for the Strait Regional Centre for Education. We've been speaking to him at his office at Sarek via Zoom. Stay tuned for more Telile 24/7 in just a moment. Now let's shift from public school to the community college sector. We found out this week that Nova Scotia community college campuses are going to offer most of their curriculum online for the 2020-21 academic year. How is that going to work within Port Hawkesbury's Strait Area campus? We caught up with the new principal at Strait Area campus, Captain Vivek Saxena, to get a little more information on how this is going to impact local post-secondary students. Here's that interview with Captain Saxena right now. It's certainly not a case that you are getting your feet wet by any means, because you've been involved for many years at the highest level with the Nautical Institute here at the Strait Area campus and with the marine training programs that have become world-renowned over the past few years. Can you give me a sense on what that perspective means for you as you settle into this new position? Just how you've seen the college grow during this time and how you feel this will help you as you get into the new principal's position here?
NSCC is not new to me. I've been working with NSCC for past 7 years, and I definitely come from a marine background, and I was leading the Nautical Institute as academic chair for past 7 years. And I can tell you the Nautical Institute definitely has grown leaps and bounds, and so does the NSCC has grown. Strait Area campus has grown leaps and bounds in those 7 years, what I have seen. So definitely quite proud of what we have achieved as a team working together at the Strait Area campus. And as you said, like I do bring a lot of marine background with me, and Nautical Institute is such a great asset for our community in Strait Area, and I think it's a kind of a hidden jewel which not many people realize the value of the Nautical Institute being in this area. We are world-class marine training provider, and it's not that we just started doing this training now. It's been doing this training for the seafarers for over 140 years. So Nautical Institute has been serving Nova Scotians for a long, long time, and is going to continue to do that for a long time, the same another for 140 years.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I want to ask you a bit about what particular vision you're bringing into your new job as the principal of the overall Strait Area campus. Obviously, you mentioned the team ethic that's been developed there over the last few years, and I know that you've worked well with the outgoing principal, Tom Gunn, but can you give me a sense of whether you come into your new job this week with any particular vision or any particular goals that you'd like to see happen for Strait Area campus overall over the next couple of years?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the name, our outgoing principal, Tom Gunn. So definitely Tom Gunn was a leader for our campus, not just for our campus, but for our community as well. And he definitely has worked as a group to grow the whole Strait Area campus. And I was fortunate enough to be working with him, alongside with him, and I was reporting to him directly. So we together have really worked quite well in the last so many years. When you talk about the vision for the campus and what I see, so definitely that is something which I want to develop with our team, with our community partners, with our industry partners, with our Mi'kmaq leaders. So I will lean up to all these people to build the vision for the campus and for our area, because as I mentioned, that the Strait Area campus is not just doing the training for the people around here in this area. It's basically a world class training institute, and it is quite important to our community. So I want to work together with our community partners and industry leaders to develop that vision and come and see where we want to go.
I don't think people realize, as you mentioned, that really the people that are coming to Strait Area campus for their training are coming from all over the world. I mean, I've seen people come in from across the country, from the U.S., even from as far afield as Nigeria, to get training at the Nautical Institute and at the overall Strait Area campus. So is that going to be a continuing focus for you and for your team as you move forward, to really try to broaden the knowledge of Strait Area Campus, not just here at home and in the Atlantic region, but around the world.
Oh, definitely. We see the value of our campus as a destination campus, as you just rightly mentioned, that we are not just doing the training for our region. Definitely that is quite important that we support our community in whatever way we can. But it is a world-class campus where we get people from across the globe. We are getting students from across Canada who are coming for the training here. We are getting students from across the world. So a number of international students have grown year over year, and we want to continue doing that. So we want to see that we can support our industry partners, our local community people, and also again, my focus will be to support the Mi'kmaq people in the region as well. So those are really quite important for us to keep in mind, that we need to grow that community and we need to support that community as well. When we talk about international, definitely international is a focus, but the local community, the local Mi'kmaq people are going to be my focus as well.
And I know that's something you folks have succeeded in doing over the past few years with the training programs out in Wagmatcook First Nation as well. So I know that's been a priority for NSCC over the last little bit. I wanted to ask you, Vivek, obviously you are coming into this position at an unusual time for NSCC and for Strait Area Campus in particular, because of what's happened with COVID-19 and the resulting social distancing protocols here in Nova Scotia. You folks have really had to scale back student and teacher participation on campus. The remaining training through the fall will be happening online. Can you give us a sense on the difficulty in making those types of decisions, but also how the campus has managed to adjust to be able to continue its training programs in this manner?
As you mentioned, that things definitely have changed in the last couple of months, and it's not just NSCC. I would say that across the world, everybody got impacted because of COVID-19, and all the businesses have to adapt to that change. We were fortunate that the leadership which we have with NSCC, we were really quick to adapt to the changes, and again, all the decisions which we have taken in the past few months have been taken with the idea that we need to keep the safety of our students as a prime importance. So that's been whenever we have taken any decision in this kind of environment, we have kept the safety of our students and employees as a paramount. And then the quality of the training which we do at our campus and across NSCC, we wanted to make sure that we don't compromise on offering the best quality training at our campus. So that has been also our focus. Whatever decision we have taken in this environment, that definitely the focus was that we should not lose sight of having the best quality program offering at the campus. And ultimately, NSCC is quite important to the growth or economy of Nova Scotia. So that I think we all recognize that. So any decision which we have taken in these last few months, that's been always on our forefront, that how we can make sure that we support the economic growth for Nova Scotia. And as you said, all the students, they successfully complete the semester. We are proud to say that everybody who were enrolled in the program and who successfully completed their semester, they were able to graduate, and we had really good number. Actually, if you compare our graduation rate from the previous year, so we didn't have any impact of COVID-19. So that way, I would say that our team has definitely succeeded, and overall NSCC has succeeded in meeting our targets with the graduation, also making sure that the students have succeeded in completing the program where they were enrolled in.
All right, I'm glad to hear that. And it's interesting to note that while all this is going on, certainly there have been major developments for Strait Area Campus and for NSCC in general. But one of those I'd like to touch on briefly is the construction of a new residence building for the Strait Area Campus. This has been a long time coming, and the construction is underway. Can you give me a sense on how that project is going and when we might be able to see a completion date?
Yeah, that's an exciting project for our campus for sure. So that's been in the works for a while, and again, this has been a vision for the campus for a long, long time. With the support of our community leaders and with the support of the province, we were able to launch this project last few months, and it's been going good. Like we didn't have any big impact because of the COVID-19. The project is moving along at a fairly good pace, and we do have timeline with regards to completing the project by the end of the year. So again, those dates can change depending upon how the things move. And you know that during these pandemic, the construction projects are getting impacted. But the current timeline is we are hoping that by end of the year, we'll be able to get this project completed.
All right, well, we'll see how that goes, but it's good to hear there's been some progress there. And there's also been progress on a partnership that Strait Area Campus has embarked on with the town of Port Hawkesbury and with the Cape Breton Partnership, a refurbishment of the Creamery building on the Port Hawkesbury waterfront to form the new Strait Area Innovation Centre. I understand from discussions with the town and from the Cape Breton Partnership that there is going to be an NSCC presence in this building and that it's going to have a real focus on marine training and ocean themes. Can you give us the NSCC perspective on what this will all mean and what exactly this centre will help you folks accomplish?
Yeah, sure. That's really an exciting project which we have been working together with the town and Cape Breton Partnership for a while, and we were fortunate to get some federal funding which we are currently using to do renovation and that building. So that's going to be our Ocean Innovation Center site. As you mentioned, this is going to be in collaboration with our industry partner, with the town and the Cape Breton Partnership. So the focus, what we are hoping will be again on the ocean safety or the marine safety. As I mentioned earlier, for our area, Strait Area region, and our Nautical Institute has been such a great asset, especially in providing the safety training. So it's time that we can share that or leverage that asset with the town, with our other industry partners, and then have more innovation going on in the region by the help of the Nautical Institute. And also we want to collaborate with other post-secondary institutes in the region to make sure that we can do the innovation when it comes to the marine safety, how we can increase the marine safety in those harsh environments. So that's going to be the focus. Again, these are early days. There are a lot of talks going on, so nothing has been finalized so far. So currently, the work which is going on in the Creamery building, it's the work which we have started doing the renovation, and we're going to have a space where we can do a teaching. There's going to be a classroom space. There's going to be a space for change room, and we do have washrooms. And so those are the renovation which we are currently doing, but we are hoping that we can have the presence of the industry and other partners who can also be in the same space so we can work together to bring in more innovation in the area of marine safety for this whole region.
Well, we're very excited to see all of this unfold, and we're glad to be able to make this connection with you as you're settling into your first week as principal of Strait Area Campus. So, Vivek Saxena, thank you so much for giving me a couple of moments here for Telile 24/7. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate that.
Oh, no trouble at all. We've been speaking with Vivek Saxena. He is the newly minted principal for Nova Scotia Community College Strait Area Campus in Port Hawkesbury. We've been speaking to him by phone today. Stay tuned for more Telile 24/7 in just a moment. Author, filmmaker, documentarian, environmentalist, Order of Canada recipient, Order of Nova Scotia recipient, and educator. These were some of the many roles served by Sylver Donald Cameron, and they've made an impact on life in Isle Madame, Richmond County, and Nova Scotia that is being felt even today, over a week after he passed away at the age of 82. To celebrate Silver Donald Cameron, whose many roles included a co-founder role for this very television station, I decided to ask two special guests who had very unique connections to Silver Donald Cameron to come in and speak to us today. And we are joined today by Dolores Boudreau, checking in from Arichat, and by Greg Silver, coming to us from St. Peter's. Each of these folks has had a very unique and special relationship with Silver Donald Cameron over the years, so we're happy to get their perspectives. First of all, thank you for taking part in this. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Hi.
Here.
Yeah. I wanted to begin by asking what went through your mind, and it is now a week since we learned that Silver Donald had passed away at the age of 82. So I wanted to begin with you, Greg, if I could. You've known him for a long time. What was the immediate reaction for you when you found out that he was no longer with us?
Well, surprised for sure, and very saddened. And I'd been missing him. I hadn't seen him in a long time. I mean, part of it's my wife and I went away for the winter. We left in the end of January, and then we came back at the outset of the COVID virus lockdown. So I hadn't seen him or talked to him in a long, long time. And I understood after I heard about his passing what led up to it, and it's very unfortunate.
Let me turn that to you, Dolores, then, but just before we talk about memories of Silver Donald, what was your immediate reaction to finding out that he had passed away?
Well, Silver Donald Cameron was larger than life, and he will always be larger than life. He lived about 20 lifetimes in one. If you look at the obituary, and if you know the family well enough to know just what pot he put his spoons into, it's almost not human how one man can accomplish so much. And when I first heard, my aunt called me and she said, "Oh my goodness, did you hear?" I went right into the stage of grief that is denial. I wasn't ready for that news. I didn't want to hear that. My thoughts went straight to Marjorie. And it's at this point, Adam, that I would like to offer my condolences to Marjorie, to his children, his siblings, a very large, loving Terrio family, and so many friends from all over the place. He will be remembered and celebrated for a very long time.
Well, let's look back at that lifetime that, as you say, larger than life. And Greg, I want to turn to you on this because I want to speak to you about some of your earliest remembrances of Silver Donald Cameron. Born in Toronto, raised in Vancouver, and did come to the Maritimes, and it was in the Maritimes that you met him after he'd been working for quite a while. Can you tell us a bit about those early days and your first impressions of Silver Donald?
Yeah, it was, I can't tell you the exact year. It was in the mid-'70s. It was shortly after I had, my partner Denise had started a graphic design and marketing communications firm in Halifax, and we had a little office and a walk-up second-story loft on Barrington Street. And one day this gentleman came up the stairs, said he had a project he wanted to talk to us about. He was quite an engaging guy with brilliant silver hair and a wispy mustache and all kinds of energy. And he introduced himself as Silver Donald Cameron. And immediately I knew who he was because I used to read Weekend magazine. And years before that, you know, I was in my early 20s then, but I remember sitting at the kitchen table at home as a teenager in St. Catharines, Ontario, reading the Weekend magazine. And this guy was telling a story about how he had moved to Cape Breton, and there were dozens of people called Donald Cameron. And at the age of 29, his hair had turned white. So like many other people, he adopted a nickname, and it was Silver Donald Cameron. I remember that story. It stuck with me. My surname is Silver, so maybe that had something to do with making it.
Yes.
But this guy walked in, and so this is interesting because a lot of people who know him from Il Madame maybe don't know about some of the other things he did. He was partners with one or two other people in a business called Magi Learning Centers. And this was in the mid-'70s, and what they had done is set up a kind of an after-school school to develop children. I guess kind of it would be somewhere between tutoring and development for probably more gifted children. And so he had this school. It was a whole new concept, and he was trying to promote it, and he came to us to help him with the communication. Now here's a guy who's a brilliant writer who understands the visual part of the communication was important. And that's what I remember more than anything from that first meeting, that he had his eyes wide open about what he needed to do this job. And he went looking on the street for, and I guess on the street, around the art college and wherever he could get referrals. And he wound up in our little studio. And we worked with him on that. And we got to be good friends. We realized we had a lot in common. In the business we were in, we needed professional writing. So Don started to write things for us, marketing brochures and, the odd media release, things that we were doing for our clients. So we worked together, but we also discovered we had a bunch of things in common. He was a wicked piano player, as you may know. And I was trying to learn the fiddle at the time. And he was in Cape Breton, so he knew a lot of the material that I was wanting to learn. He also was a sailor, and as I was. I was a recreational sailor. Don had actually built his own sailboat, or he was in the process of doing it. That's, to me, that was a big project. I couldn't imagine building one. It was enough to look after one. We both had Acadian wives. Another thing we had in common, and they kind of looked a little bit the same too. Anyways, we developed this friendship. Don would come to visit us at our office. We did things on the telephone a lot back then. Our relationship working together and seeing each other socially, mainly in Halifax, went for a number of years. We did travel on business a little bit together. I did for a couple of years. I had a fairly major project in Newfoundland with the power utility there. And Don came with me to do some writing on that. So we spent some time in St. John's, and after work on George Street, one can have a good time with Silver Donald Cameron. And we went to a lot of places where people knew him. It was like hanging with a celebrity a little bit, which was new for me, and that was a lot of fun because whatever bar we went into, people would know him in St. John's, which I found interesting.
What was he like on the road? You talk about how people reacted to him, but what was he like as a traveling companion, Greg?
Well, he was extremely polite to everybody. He was interested in everybody. People that we ran into that he hadn't seen in a long time, he would know what they were up to 5 years ago and ask them how that was going. I remember there was one woman we met, and she was running a book club, and Don had known her from that. So he was remembering titles that they had been discussing years earlier, and he wondered what else she'd been reading, and he mentioned some of the old titles. He had a good memory for. He could have been a politician, and as you know, he was an ardent supporter of the NDP for many years, and then the Green Party. He was very interested in politics.
I remember covering an NDP nominating convention that he oversaw in Richmond County in 1997, and this was at a time when the NDP was starting to surge both locally and provincially, and he was emceeing the whole thing, and he strolled up to the microphone and beheld the crowd at the Parish Hall in Lewisdale and grinned like a Cheshire cat and said, well, well, well. Look at everybody here, and he was pretty happy that evening. Yeah, I want to shift the focus to you quickly, Dolores. What were your first impressions of Silver Donald? Do you remember the first time you would have run into him, or the first time you became aware of it?
The first time I would have run into he and Marjorie would have been in social circles, weddings, the hall in discos. Really a supporter, really a fan of this little island. He believed in us before we believed in us.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that has really translated into the work he's done. And it's been interesting, Greg, to hear you talk about how he was bringing people under his wing and wanting to have them trained and wanting to educate them. And that continued well into the 1990s with what he did with co-founding Development Isle Madame Association, co-founding this very station that we're doing the interview for, Telile Community Television, training people in how to be broadcasters, how to be journalists, using his own particular experience to help them out. Dolores, I want to ask you, what kind of impact do you feel he's made on Isle Madame in particular, in the many ways that he has served this area? What kind of a legacy does he leave in terms of the island?
I believe he really had vision, and not only did he have the vision, but he could actually bring the people together to execute these ideas that will be with us, that will exist on this island for a very long time. And, you know, DEMA is one of those entities that it's amazing what they've done, what they do, and the legacy that he's left behind. His legacy stretches far beyond Isle Madame. Before I forget, though, as I'm listening to Greg, I'm learning so much. There is so much to Silver Donald Cameron. What we are doing here today is nothing but a tip of the iceberg.
What really I find remarkable, too, about Silver Donald is that he was working and creating and developing right into the end. Margaret Atwood, of all people, was interviewed last week shortly after his passing, and she mentioned that he had emailed her in March as the pandemic was really sweeping across Canada with some ideas for how the pandemic could be helped, or how people could be helped during the pandemic by the work that he was doing and the work that he and his colleagues were doing. He was willing to offer free several episodes of his show, The Green Interview, which he had posted online, and he was willing to offer as well his books, his expertise, whatever he could do to be able to help people through. And he was still writing. He was preparing a book about the sad situation involving the twin Maggies that was going to launch in August. My understanding is that the launch will still happen. Just a month ago, he wrote a piece about the tragic shootings in the Portapique area that literally over the weekend I was still seeing circulating on social media. So he was living a very vibrant life well up to the very end.
I'll tell you, Adam, if we were not in a pandemic, and if we could host a gathering of friends and people who admired him and loved him, there is not a venue big enough on Isle Madame, and maybe not in Cape Breton, to house the people that would have come to honor this man.
One of the things, you know, when I finally made it to Isle Madame, it was 1994. Don and I had a working relationship and a friendship, and we spent most of our time together in Halifax. But we finally came to Discoos 1994 for a summer vacation. He and Lulu had invited us to come and stay with them, and it was my first chance to really see Isle Madame. I had been to Cape Breton, but I'd never spent like more than a few days in one place at a time. And very quickly we started to see this community that Don lived in, and he introduced me to the mayor. That was Ray LeBlanc down at the store, right? And it was just interesting. Everybody had a role in that community, and Don had kind of introduced them to me. So these amazing images of people and what they did to keep the community going. And it wasn't long after that, Don had been, promoting this visit, but what he really had up his sleeves, he wanted to show us some very attractively priced real estate in Discoos. And it wasn't long after that we bought Ethel Poirier's house, and it was a cottage. 1998, moved in. And during the summers, I spent a lot of time in the summer there, weekends, I started to see what Don was doing in the community. And Telile was one of the things that I saw, which is absolutely amazing. I mean, how many people go start a television station in their community? And, at the time, the big thing was getting, it was on cable, but they were actually going to broadcast and build a tower. And by the time I had moved into Isle Madame 1998, Don had invited me onto the board. So I got to see, just what happened with this volunteer community board and the young people there that Don and others had hand-selected from the community, understanding they had the brains and the raw talent, and they just needed a little bit of development. And Don did that, and he brought others around to help do that. And you can see what a success Telile is today. And I guess I could say the same parallel thing at DEMA. I mean, Don understood that you needed a group to talk about development and planning, and that included the culture and the society and economics. And DEMA looked at those things, and Don found young people who could be professional economic developers, and he put them in jobs there. And, you know, we can just look around and see the people that did those jobs in the early days where they are now. They're still helping Cape Breton big time in economic and social development issues. And this guy's a writer, right? But I mean, he wrote about things he loved about, and he did more than just write about them. He took hands-on action to organize things. He was really good with people, not only like understanding who might be good at what, or who might want to do what. He found disadvantaged people and taught them skills. He found government grants to start these things, to pay people, and to find resources to help teach people. And he's left an incredible legacy in Almadam. Just amazing.
He was very much like a dog with a bone, very passionate about any aspect of what he did, and especially when it meant training a new generation of people to be leaders. He wasn't just content to sit back and be the leader himself. He wanted to equip and engage a new generation of leadership for Almadam and for Richmond County, and we're going to feel the effects of that for years to come.
I think so. A turning point I saw was when he did the research and finally produced his book, The Living Beach, which was, I really got a sense of, you know, how concerned and knowledgeable he was about the environment. And the more he learned, the more concerned he got. And I think, as we know, his outreach went way beyond Cape Breton with this project that wound up being the Green Interview, where he's making a global impact by bringing people who have messages about how to move the environmental issues forward on a global scale and reaching a global audience. That really is an incredible accomplishment.
I want to head into the home stretch here by asking each of you, what do you feel is the greatest lesson that Silver Dawn has taught either of you, either directly or indirectly? What do you think is a great life lesson that you carry from either a personal experience you had with him or just from looking at his life's work as a whole?
Back in 2002, I released my first CD. And I knew enough about marketing that I knew I needed a review. I needed a good review of this product. And who else on Almadam to approach but Silver Donald Cameron? I mean, he was our most prolific writer. I knew he was a generous spirit. And I had only met him, we were acquaintances. But I thought, you know, I'd like to approach this man and ask him to write a review of my CD. So when I did that, he said to me, that's not really my area of expertise.
Oh.
And I really appreciated the integrity. He said, but leave that with me. So I did leave it with him. And a couple of weeks later, a friend calls and says, Dolores, do you have the Chronicle Herald? And I say, no. You might want to get the Chronicle Herald. So off I go. And here it is. This is the Chronicle Herald that the person was speaking of. It's called the Sunday Herald.
Yes.
Sunday, October 20th, 2020. So I start leafing through this particular paper, and I come upon none other than Rock Voisin. Okay? Oh. As an Acadian, I love Rock Voisin, but right next to Rock Voisin, there was my picture. It said, CB newcomer Boudreau sings with polish of a veteran. And I start to weep. Then I read, Boudreau's debut CD, Me, Myself, and Moi, arrived in the mail this week thanks to Silver Donald Cameron of Discos. I put it in the CD player. I'm glad I did. You know, it was really difficult for me to make this CD. And the reason why is because I had no confidence, so little confidence in my ability. And what Silver Donald Cameron did for me by doing that, he actually asked Stephen Cooke, who was an excellent entertainment reporter. So thus, this is not my area of expertise, but let me see what I can do, eh? What he did was he inserted within me the seed of some confidence that carried me through the next 18 years, and I still walk around with it today. I've always been grateful to him for that, and I know I've expressed it, but if I could go back about a month and know what I know now, I think I would express it that much more, because I continue to be grateful. So that's our lesson today. If you have something you're thankful for, go say thanks today, because tomorrow is not a promise.
No. That's a good lesson to think about. Greg, what about yourself? Last word to you. What's the greatest lesson that Silver Donald taught to you through the course of your relationship with him?
The thing that I really remember him for and really thank him for, because it's improved my life, is to understand that everybody has something to say and everybody has a story. And you have to be patient enough to talk and listen and do more listening. And I guess maybe in a nutshell, when I got to Discoos and eventually made it my home, and I live in Cape Breton still full time, it was a very different world for me. I grew up, upper middle class city, business owning family. Everybody had a higher education; it was expected. And the people I met in Discoos, and this surprised me, there were men my age that couldn't write. But you could have an intelligent discussion with them. So it was, formal education isn't everything, and I really didn't get that until I started to see how Don operated with the resources in the little community of Isle Madame. And I started to meet some very bright people who didn't have a whole lot of book learning, but they did have critical thinking skills, and they had colorful language that was a joy to hear. So that, I'll leave it at that, Adam and Dolores. Nice to see you this morning.
Yes, you too.
And it's wonderful to see both of you and to hear very different observations and experiences with regard to this man who we will never forget, Silver Donald Cameron. Greg Silver, Dolores Boudreau, thank you for joining me on Telile 24/7 today. This week, we're going to end Telile 24/7 by taking you on a trip to the Canso Causeway. On this sunny Friday morning, the link between Cape Breton Island and mainland Nova Scotia seems peaceful and quiet, light years away from Minneapolis, where last week George Floyd lost his life after a police officer kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, setting off a tidal wave of protests, anger, and frustration over how black people are treated in North America and around the world. Protest activity also happened here in Nova Scotia, and on this sunny day in the first week of June, a young woman from Port Hawkesbury became the first person to lead an active Black Lives Matter protest in the Strait of Canso. This is Sasha Repko. In 2017, she competed in the Canada Summer Games in Winnipeg. The following summer, she won 2 silver medals in track events at the Special Olympics Summer Games in Antigonish. And in 2019, Repko was named the Special Olympics Female Athlete of the Year for Nova Scotia. However, on this sunny day in June, Repko and her brother Talon have a different goal in mind as they seek to set the hearts and minds of Strait area residents towards a new era of sensitivity and respect for African Americans and African Canadians by police and the general public.
They're getting treated badly. We just want to end it, try to show more love and then hate. And I'm feeling very sad at what, why would a white police officer kill a black man just for no reason at all. Taking a break on Reeve Street in Port Hawkesbury, just over 2 hours into their trek,
Talon Repco shows some frustration towards police mismanagement as well.
The best way to actually end police brutality is through stricter policies and demilitarization.
However, as they speak across the street from a lowered African heritage flag at the Port Hawkesbury Civic Centre, the Repcos insist that their motives are pure. They want to go to the Port Hawkesbury RCMP detachment this afternoon to see if one of the officers there will take a knee with them as a form of protest against racism and police brutality. At the same time, they're also cautioning against high-intensity protests like those that have led to rioting and looting in different parts of the United States.
Who needs that? Like, you don't need to do that. Just show to... I'm like, that's not what it means. That's not what Black Lives Matter means. It means just to show, have a peaceful protest march, just a simple one without no violence, no hurt at all.
For Sasha Repco, this protest also has a personal stake. She's competed alongside black athletes in the Special Olympics, including some with such conditions as autism and Down syndrome.
I suffer with autism, and every time I go into a store and stuff, oh, hi, Sasha, how you doing? And then when I start talking is when they know that I have some learning problems and stuff, and they try to act all different, act nicely, but really in return, it's basically like the opposite. So I just want to change that and make it right.
At the same time, she and her brother Talon have also experienced loss in their own family, which makes them feel an extra layer of empathy towards the children of George Floyd, who will never see their father again.
We just lost our mom due to cancer, and I can see how they're feeling. And I feel really bad for that little girl.
Nearly 3 hours after their emotional walk began, a happy ending for the Repcos. Port Hawkesbury RCMP Staff Sergeant Dave Moran came out and spoke to them before taking a knee with Talon and Sasha.
So he came out and stuff and asked him a few questions of if he supported All Blacks Matter and if he can end, if he respects to end racism, and which he did, and he told me he just feels really bad at what happened, and he's happy, proud of me and Talon to do this protest and march, from the end of the causeway to the police station, and to end racism and end to respect All Blacks Matter, and he did a kneel, and we got some pictures with him, and he was really, really nice. He told me all he wants to do is protect. He doesn't want any violence. He doesn't want he wants to respect too. He wants to help end this racism and all the black whoever. It doesn't matter what skin you have. Doesn't matter if you're gay, you're homosexual, you have disabilities or autism. People are gonna be. He's gonna treat officers are gonna be treated like everyone equally. Doesn't matter what your skin is. It was quite a day. It was a long walk, but it was worth it. It was worth every step.
And there's already been one other result from the Repco's protest on Friday. Sasha Repco is already planning a follow-up Black Lives Matter event coming up on Saturday evening at 7 o'clock at the parking lot of the Provincial Building on Reeve Street in Port Hawkesbury. At the Canso Causeway for Telile 24/7, I'm Adam Cooke.
And that wraps up this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I'd like to thank all my guests for this week, and I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in. If you have any suggestions for future interviews or for story ideas, you can get in touch with me via phone or email. And if you'd like to follow Telile Community Television on social media, there are several ways to do that. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can go on our Telile YouTube channel to be able to find a lot of new material that's been coming through over the last little while, including every single episode of Telile 24/7 and some special stories and interviews that have come from those episodes. For now, I'm Adam Cooke. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll look forward to seeing you next week with a fresh new edition of Telile 24/7.